Good afternoon. I'm delighted to see so many of you here, and I'm delighted to welcome here this huge panel discussion with a lot of talented people, with major figures and experts who are going to help us understand the hot topics. There's always a hot topic, and this afternoon we'll be talking about the following topic between manufacture and sale. How can you reduce the lead time? We know that it's one of the major issues at the moment. And there's another one which is going up the agenda. It's the carbon footprint. So how can you, so to speak, square the circle to really try and meet the needs of the fashion industry? So we're just waiting for our colleague who's putting some order here with the chairs. I think there's already a question. Sorry, comments I've made off mic. Oh, I've got my own chair with my nameplate. Thank you so much, Augustin. You see, Augustin is a great man. Well, don't... No, I mean, I'm not the lead speaker here. So I'm not going to introduce all our speakers, all our participants here. There are too many of you, but I'll hand the mic to all of you, and I'd like to introduce yourselves. So I thought that to kick off this conference, we could spend some time to discuss a very specific topic, and I'd like to hand over to Corinne Farras, who is the Chief Executive of Terra, which is a so-called competitiveness cluster that the French and European industry can be proud of, because this company works in the upstream and downstream. So can you tell us about this company? Can you tell us about upcycling, and can you just introduce Terra? Yes, so Terra is a so-called competitiveness cluster under the French national public policy. So it's an innovation cluster, that's the idea. And we mainly work on the development of new products in the textile industry and all the way down to the market. So from the yarn to the material all the way to the end product. And we try to do this collaboratively. This is our core business, really. Now, second, what your question was about what we do in terms of carbon footprint and in terms of upcycling. Yes, right. We've realized that the textile industry produces a lot of waste in factories. The thing is that we know what this waste is made of. So we decided to put our heads together with a dozen of industrial companies, and we've tried to think about potential measures to cut our footprint at a factory level, and also what products we could make from this. So we had companies that produced either yarn or that produced woven products, and so we organized some kind of speed dating between well, waste users, so to speak, and textile professionals. So there were about 100 appointments between producers of waste, so to speak, and a specialist of upcycling. And there's one project that you know probably quite well. They've worked on the edges of fabric, and it's been used for other projects. Right, right. So this is really a collaborative project, and we've also thought about other applications for this product. We have another strand or plank in our strategy about new materials. There's very little production of new materials in Europe at the moment. And so if you want to reduce your carbon footprint, you need to think about how material can be produced at, well, regional, national or European level. And at the moment, we're trying to help a Japanese startup which used used clothes. So they try to use polyester, and they recycle polyester, but there's nothing innovative here. It already exists. But the interesting thing about their know-how is that they take used garments as such. They don't have to remove buttons, zips, and so on. And so this is a business model that could potentially be viable in Europe. So we try to improve the viability of this company in order to produce recycled polyester in France that can be used, that can be reused in the textile industry. There are many applications, but let me hand over to my co-panelists. It's very interesting to hear those opening comments. I think it's great to have a dialogue between the different panelists. Now, let's hand over to Caroline. So, Caroline, you were telling us about all the brainstorming that the industry is currently doing, and of course, it does have an influence across the industry. Now, our Dutch friends, well, you have also started something really special with, of course, a major aspect for sustainability, right? So, what do you do in the Atelier Néerlandais, in the Dutch workshop, or l'Atelier Néerlandais? And how does it work with industrialists and designers in your country, Caroline? Well, thank you very much for inviting me. I'll just switch to French.
But well, as in the Netherlands, we are a very small country. We are not a big textile producer, but well, we are all over the world also manufacturing things. In the Netherlands, I think there are similar activities going on. One is also in kind of related to the recycling, upcycling. From the government point of view, like it's a lot about workwear that we are trying to recycle the workwear and upcycle them again. That's kind of an initiative. Some larger corporations are active in this field. On the other hand, the designers, they are very active in trying to find new materials, and that's a kind of, well, who are biodegradable. Like we know Agnela Hoiting, who was here I think 2 years ago with her mycelium thing. She also won the H&M Global Fashion Award to do more research on this in the coming 3 years. And Tjeerd Veenhoven, who is really into the algae, so that's kind of looking for really new materials, so that are less damaging to the world. Thirdly, it's also about, of course, producing less or manufacturing less, made to measure. This kind of developments we see everywhere. But we at the atelier we try to look for collaboration between, well, even the lonely designers and the industry, and also looking for European collaborations to make this work.
Thank you. Thank you for this introduction. Merci beaucoup pour.
Thank you very much for this introduction. Let's now hand over to Abdullah Zaber, who is one of the largest operators in Bangladesh, and is going to tell us about his company, what they do, their approach. And I think you're specialized in casual. I know that you regularly come to Tex World. And so could you please clarify or explain? I think you'd like to use your notes, but could you tell us more about what you do in your country, in your company, for the global industry?
Please.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Thank you so much to be here.
I'm from Bangladesh. I'm the owner of Zaber & Zubair Fabrics.
Yes.
We are the largest vertically fabric manufacturer. We have vertical integration. We have our own spinning, weaving. We produce bed linen, towel, and also we produce casual fabrics, denim.
Casual, yes.
Now we are investing in producing synthetic-based fabric. So there was a discussion about carbon footprint. We have right now 10 spinning mills and 10 weaving mills. So all of our spinning mills and weaving mills, the air conditioning system is running with the exhaust hot air from generator. So there is like we are not emitting any carbon for running our chiller. And in our factory, we are using recycled yarn, and we have our own bed linen manufacturing unit. So we are getting cutting jute. So those cutting jute, we are from that cutting jute, we are extracting fiber, and with those fibers, we are making yarn, and we are producing fabric and also bed linen and towel. And in our wet processing unit in dyeing and printing, there is a huge consumption of caustic soda. That is one of the most hazardous chemicals. So we have caustic recovery plant we bought from Italy. So the caustic what we are using in our factories, so 80% we are recovering. And all the condensate hot water, so we are returning back from our machine to our feed water tank of our boiler. So we are reducing gas consumption around 30%. So a lot of sustainable program is going on in our factory.
Thank you so much, Monsieur, to underline. And you are exactly on the theme of the empreinte carbone. Frédéric, l'empreinte carbone, c'est une chose quand...
So, Frederick, when I talked to you, TCBL, you told me that TCBL was really working hard on the carbon footprint. Yes, so TCBL stands for Textile and Business Labs. It started in 2015, and the mission statement is to reduce the carbon footprint of the clothing industry by 20% between now and 2025. And we want to take advantage of this reduction to try and work on new business models for the branch. Our observation is that if we remain on a business as usual basis, we won't change anything. Yes, because there's no choice but to change. Actually, change is now underway. Absolutely. So, at TCBL, we have a community of businesses, and so we've tried and tested collaboration scenarios between businesses to try and show that we can do things differently, that we can manufacture in a better way, that we can still keep to deadlines and reduce our carbon footprint. So, for example, we've worked on, Corinne could have talked about Hector. Hector is a company that makes shoes from recycled yarn. And so this is really a boosted industry in the city of Rouen in France. We have many other examples. We have partnerships between tailor-made shirt makers and other companies, so they manage to avoid overproduction. They manage to reduce their carbon emission related costs and their waste production. And we have other scenarios where we try to have a shift in the mindsets of consumers. So if you want to change the mindset of consumers, you have to show them that you can, or you want to do things totally different with, for example, bio-dyes, or garments that you no longer sew, but that you glue the different parts of the garment. Or we try to bring up to date or freshen up some traditions. We work with people who work on silk or with silk in a different way. It's not always lawful, but it can have real consequences in terms of carbon footprint. So scenarios which are customer or consumer-centric, and also other scenarios as referred to by Corinne, where businesses try to produce less, try to have it's more accurate. So that's what you're saying. Absolutely. For example, in distance selling or remote selling, and upstream in the industry, everything related to yarn. Because it's great to manufacture more things with less carbon, but it's even better if the input products have been processed in a low carbon way. We'll come back to this and we'll talk about the integration of the value chain. Now, before I hand over the mic to our friends who are more in the downstream industry, you referred earlier on to scenarios and consumers, and we have Augustin, who is a consultant who works with Nelly Rodi. They work a lot on social networks. And I'd like Augustin to tell us about this shift amongst consumers. I think that you actually addressed the 2030 scenario, which was one of the questions addressed. So, as a consultant, what can you tell us about Nelly Rodi? And, well, can you hear the gentleman properly? Yes? So let me tell you about the observations we've made at the Nelly Rodi agency. So you were saying earlier on that, that there's a real shift in consumer behavior. But I think there's another interesting aspect, and I think we should focus on this. It's the opportunity to create new business models. Actually, new business models are emerging in upcycling, for example, as we said earlier on. And we're currently following several brands which are really going local. It's better, or it's more than made in France. It's really local made, so to speak. So we're currently keeping track of another number of brands which actually have really interesting slogans, such as re-localize. Oh, that's a good one. For example, there's quite an interesting brand, and I think it was mentioned under the R3 iLab. It's 1083, that's the name of the brand, and their claim is that the end product traveled at most 1083 kilometers. That's an interesting claim. Yes, which is the largest distance between two French cities, right? Yes, it's a huge diagonal. Now, again, with regards to the business model, we are witnessing a lot of things about services. And again, that's a real shift, a real change. So it's about the use performance and the material footprint. And a lot of interesting things are currently being done on platforms. So this came from the US. First with Runs and Runaway about 10 years ago. And they are more or less spreading their operations across Europe. And so we're talking about brands that really try to make garments which are supposed to last longer, because they are meant to be rented out. They're not meant to be sold, but that's a different business model. All right, thanks very much, Augustin. Let's listen to Frédéric Maus. Frédéric Maus is the chief executive of WSM, which is a major show that I suppose you're familiar with. I think it's great to have the upstream and downstream branches to discuss around the same table. So, my dear friend, you've seen a lot of, you saw a lot of things at the last session. So do you see any evolution? And do you see any shift in buyers' expectations? Good afternoon. Well, we deal with this in two different ways. First, we see there's a growing demand from buyers to identify environmentally responsible brands and sustainable brands. And this year we've been helped a great deal by digital, because we have an app. And on Who's Next, for example, there are approximately 1,600 exhibitors, so there's a wide array of businesses. And so buyers can predefine a sort of itinerary. And is it the first time you did this? Well, we used to do it, but in a much more makeshift or traditional way. But we had been encouraging this for a very long time, because for us it's very important to promote young creators, and I'm thinking here of Atelier Meraki and other businesses, and it's really their state of mind. And so it's really interesting to see that all these brands, all these emerging brands, have already taken up these concepts, and they won't develop any projects that won't be along these lines. Now, this industry is probably not the most sustainable, because we put up, we set up a booth just for 3 or 4 days that we then destroy. So I think we should, put our money where our mouth is. And so when I first came to office, I appointed a CSR officer, and she's trying to raise awareness amongst staff about all this. There's always a question of what we call donation and debt. So we've really tried to go down this road, this sustainable road, and for the upcoming event in September particularly, we will try to do this, and we have to be a solution for the market. Retailers, brands are trying to find stylistic solutions, but we have to simplify the process for buyers. Well, thank you very much. Thank you very much for telling us about this priority. I think everybody agrees with you. So retailers are your clients, are your buyers, and I think everybody is trying to jump on this bandwagon. Now, Isabelle Glaise, and then we'll also talk to the lady here who created Marie Antoinette. So let's first listen to Isabelle Glaise. Yes, so Village des Créateurs supports young fashion design brands which are environmentally friendly, so eco brands. A few years back, we had young brands that wanted to integrate our certificate, or they wanted to be awarded our certificate. They thought they would make their products in France. And they thought it would not be economical or cost effective, but, well, sorry to interrupt you. So is this a startup culture, or is this a new mindset? Yes. People used to tell us, I want to make products in France, that's my goal. But, well, forget about the style and the business model. That's what people used to say. Well, I think that it's easier, actually, for young brands. Well, I should say it's less difficult for young brands because large corporations have their processes, specs, and so on and so forth. And I think that there's a real groundswell with all these young brands because they have it in their DNA. They usually they mostly have these two aspects in their DNA. And in the coming weeks, well, you can see on our website we have 80 brands which are just categorized between, for example, women's ready-to-wear and so on and so forth. But we're going to create a special category made in France. It may not include all of, well, for example, the warp and the weft, and we talked about the yarn earlier on, but well, 75% of the businesses we support make their products in France. And then I'll hand over to my colleague. And we also have businesses that make products at home. And I think it's really young people who are brimming over with ideas. And so if businesses include such, production units, small-scale production units at home, that's interesting. Okay, so it can be made in Paris, or it's actually homemade. That's your point. That's what you're saying. Isn't homemade? Well, both. Because I work with my kids. It's really a family business. How old are they? They're 26 and 21. Okay, that's fine.
And my son-in-law as well. And he's 26 as well. You know. Yeah. No. So we actually print tights. And we only deliver in a radius of 70 kilometers. We manufacture everything on the spot except for the white base, which is bought at Nîmes. So there we actually go beyond our 70 kilometers. So the made in local, this actually encourages a local creator, a local designer, and they can have relationships with all the different stages, which allows them to develop very quickly. At the beginning, we didn't necessarily want to have the Made in France label, but I wanted to understand what I was really doing. And I really wanted to give the right response to what people were looking for. Yes, so it's a question of sharing. Yes, we're talking about social media, of course, and where there's a lot of communication on how we actually work, what our methods are, and how we explain how we want to meet all the different requirements. We want to have the requirements of the wearers of them, you know, the fact that they should fit the morphology, that they shouldn't bag at the knees, and that this is easier to do with a small company like ours than a large company. Why couldn't it be manufactured by a large factory? Because it's too far away from you and it's mentally? No, it's the question of processes. The processes are too slow. The very fact that we work in a family unit allows us to actually carry out experimentation. I'm not saying it's not possible, that's why, but it is a particular biosphere that allows us to do this. And we can carry out all sorts of tests. And at the moment, we're the only company in France actually printing tights because it's a very complex process. So you have a market niche, which is fantastic, yes. And another question. You were talking about the scenario 2030. We can see today that consumers are becoming more and more demanding with regard to the traceability of their products. And this has become really an absolute imperative in terms of carbon footprints and co-design as well, co-development. And today we're seeing that consumers want to actually take part in the creation of the product that they're going to wear. Yes, indeed. And they want to see what's happening. A lot of people just turn up at the workshop wanting to have a look. And we have to explain that we can't let them in. You know, we're quite difficult to find, you know, but people turn up and they want to know about it. And then they communicate. They're our ambassadors. They say there's the ecosystem, perhaps this happens a lot in the Dutch clusters, does it not? Is it in all different sectors, not just fashion? Is there an actual cluster that forms with the designers in the distribution and all the other areas of the chain?
Things related that you combine the design also to the whole system. You also have the whole thing about like the new business model to lease jeans.
Included distribution or not?
Including distribution.
Yes,
you
please.
bring your jeans back after you have finished it, and then it's only 50% is being to be recycled and upcycled again. That's one movement. I don't know if you thought about that. The co-creation is also possible. There's also some initiatives that the designer designs you can make to measure, and you can go to a 3D printer and to have it fixed and put it together. But that's all very infant. That's very experimental. But of course, there are movements to see how we can try to upscale things. I think that's like there are many small brands and especially young generation who are very good at it. On the other hand, what you see is this kind of international movement also to certify how you manufacture, and also in the end to have a kind of a standard that you know where things come from. There are business models that you can really see who made something or where it's manufactured, and also what the carbon footprint is. Maybe you are aware, like with this Higg index, that you know in the end that's going slow, but at least that's also from the other side, like the kind of the companies who are manufacturing internationally, but also see that, well, the kind of the kind of materials they use, the working conditions, and also that it's not child labor, those kind of things, that in the end that you could look it up in your own garment. Where are things coming from? Like with the like Made in France movement, I think is very big here. The Made in the Netherlands movement is not big, but it's more kind of Made in EU. That's kind of bring it closer. Yeah. But in the end, like, well, we are in a global, a global world. So you cannot say like it's only made here, because also I think in Bangladesh there are terrific things going on to improve the conditions on how to manufacture. Maybe so you can elaborate. Can elaborate a little bit on this.
So you have the microphone. Yeah. Yes, please, Mr. Zaber. Yes, yeah. Mohammed. Yes.
Yeah, please.
Please do.
Now, what is the question?
The question is, in your country.
Yeah.
Yes, that is in your country and in your company, integrated as you are. What thinking and what's your system and integration concerning the demands of the European consumer or European manufacturers. How do you work that about?
So
Just for,
are you talking about like organic cotton or BCI cotton?
Why not? Yes.
Okay. So I can tell you that there is as Bangladesh is the second largest garment manufacturer after China.
Yes.
So there is I sell fabric to the H&M and also to IKEA and also to C&A. So 70% of those fabric are made with organic cotton or BCI cotton. So and there is always question the traceability. So from where we are getting the cotton and in which spinning we are producing yarn. So
excuse me, but this point of traceability is very important for the European consumer, if I dare say Occidental consumer too. Traceability.
Yeah.
Yes.
So sometimes the buyer they send their auditor to our factory, then they just do the audit that either what the fabric we are selling to them with organic cotton or BCI cotton, and they come and they do audit.
Thank you. Vous voulez réagir?
Oh. So
Would you like to say something about that?
there is like how we are using some chemicals and dyes from Huntsman and BASF, where we don't need to use high temperature and also hot water. With the room temperature, we are dyeing fabric and also we are printing. And there are some that in Bangladesh there is largest number of green factories right now in Bangladesh. A lot of factory, if you go there, it's a tropical country. We get rain around continuously for 3 to 4 months here. So in my factory we have rainwater harvesting plant. The capacity is 100,000 meter cube. We preserve in rainy season and we use in our fabric processing unit.
Thank you so much for this example. Est-ce qu'il y a une réaction?
Any reactions about traceability at House Next? How do you see this? You present a market offering, but how does the trade fair actually deal with this question of traceability? Well, we're not a certification institute, so it's difficult for us. So we have to declare this, or the brands have to declare it. So this is something that's required. So we have to make sure that people do voluntarily give this information, and we have to make sure that we give a good place. Now, in certain sectors, instead of presenting a collection, perhaps they're going to present their business model, and we can see sometimes whether there's a change. If we want to change the sector, it's not just a question of being a little bit more eco-friendly or use organic cotton. It's the whole system that has to be challenged, and this is a question for us because we're at the center of this ecosystem. We have independents, we have producers and distributors, so we have to make sure that these new business models emerge, and this is something we're really concerned about. So with regard to our market offering, what we want to actually promote is the fact that we're going to do new ways of doing business, and in the future there will be exhibitors that actually work differently, and the reason for this is because the consumer wants this. And we have to take account of what the consumer wants. And of course, this is amplified by the social media. Yeah, so this is pulling the business this way. We're in a very organized area where everybody has their place, everyone has their position, and I think the digital era will help us, help us to just get over this idea of just having a 4-day event, but really making sure that the people who are in our trade fairs will themselves ask these questions throughout their working year. You know, they might ask questions about a supplier or a process or a way of doing business. And so this is possible now that people can actually dialogue about this, and this will actually pull us forward. I think, you know, small actions accumulated will actually have a positive effect. You know, perhaps all roundtables are different, as you see, the topics are different, but we really see that fashion industry, integrated or not integrated, we're all following the same trends. Obviously, there's a lot of work to be done in this sphere, but everybody agrees that everybody has their points of view. Caroline had hers, and you all have your points of view. And this actually creates new associations, and so we're actually putting in place a new system. Have you got something to say? Isabelle, I'd just like to say two things. This new generation, perhaps, shares more. This is part of our DNA. We're there to help companies. 10 years ago or so, people didn't share as much, especially information, particularly with regard to the place of manufacture. And so I think mentalities have changed. I'd also like to say that when we support people, we have a multi-designer boutique. Today, well, a few years ago, the consumer didn't understand what they really wanted, but today, we see that the consumer is more open. But the question of price is ever present. So they look at the product, they see whether they like it, and sometimes, however, the price can be an obstacle. But if it isn't, but the very fact that the actual object is made locally, that really is very positive for in the consumer's eyes. So I think this is another change that has happened in the consumer sphere, that we're actually seeing this every day. I'd just like to react to two things that you've said. As Isabelle and Corinne said, obviously it's clear that small companies are younger, they're more agile, they actually work with in collective intelligence. If we want to go even further and we want to square the circle, we have to go through the glass ceiling. And this means that larger companies have to work hand in hand with the small, agile structures. I don't necessarily mean that they have to be integrated. By experience, we know this is sometimes not the best way forward, because sometimes a little agile rabbit actually is transformed into a mammoth. But I think basically in terms of the reputation and the image of major brands, it's important to create capsule collections which actually boosts volumes and turnover, and also allows the young small companies to work, and these ones are of course much more agile. And I think this will be beneficial for the whole sector, but not just the sector. When you look at medium-sized companies and then you see how startups or small companies work, perhaps they borrow a little bit less than a major group, but business circle is actually turning. You know, they might be borrowing 500,000 or a million, but this allows them, of course, to be a little bit more flexible. But it's very interesting to look at a whole landscape of the sector. Obviously, it's complex in the fashion sector because the chain is extremely long. I mean, there's about 8 or 9 or even more different stages in the whole process. And I wanted to say something about traceability. There are some very good organizations working on this, but for very small companies that are really the budding shoots of fashion in the future, it's very expensive for them. And today I think that we have to think about other systems that might provide a certification. In the food sector, there were participative certification systems, people who are trained and consumers themselves, a certain co-responsibility with regard to certification. And I think this is a development that could be applied to our sector. In English, it's called the participation guarantee system, and I think this is something to be looked at. And this would probably be a lot less expensive for young, small startups. But they're nevertheless demonstrating that they are part of an initiative to promote traceability. Well, with regard to transparency, you have to look at the new tools available. There are 3 stages or 3 ways of being transparent. We've talked about labels and the self-declaratory method, and the fact now that it is really the consumer that has all the power, and we must remember this. And there are lots of grading systems or emerging, and we're seeing these. We have clothes pounds, ferry made. This is another further step in the customer's grading system, and we're going to see this pushed to the end, to the extreme with the blockchain. Except the blockchain takes up a lot of minutes per certification, and of course it is very, very heavy in terms of carbon footprint. Well, I don't know all the details of this, but we have seen certain applications, and we'll see what the outcome is. I just wanted to say something. So, I mean, we started off by working on technical textiles, and we worked in a collaborative process. So a company has to be part of a collective if we actually help them. So now we have about 30 manufacturers, people who are chemists, we have yarn manufacturers, people who are marketeers, all thinking about how to work on the carbon footprint. And we're looking at the complexity of actually putting this in place, because we have to have recyclers who will be working on products that are not part of their actual core product, their core business. So you can see it is really quite a complex process. And I think now, with regard to collaboration, there is a new generation. But I think there's a new generation, but the old generation, the older generation were very good. Experience counts. Globally, collaboration is very meaningful today, but I look at the pharmaceutical sector, for example. This sector is actually accompanying and supporting biotechnology startups. There are brands which are very good, but if they want to develop over and above their standard brands, it's very important to have these young startups which will actually change the deal, actually make sure that we progress towards the future. And I think we need of all of these different players in our ecosystem. Well, this is very nice to hear this. We don't want people to be opposed to each other. It's a question of collaboration throughout all the different sectors. The Netherlands with France, with Asia, people who work in the trade fair sector, local collectives, design offices. I think it's a very intelligent, modern way of working together. And I see this S-mod opposite me. A few years ago, it wouldn't have been a collaborative stand like this. Each stand would have been individual. I think nowadays what we're doing, we are transferring fields of application into different areas. You were talking about the health sector. You mustn't remember that the consumer's behavior, the person who's very careful about his health was somebody who'll be very careful about what he actually wears. So it's very important to see that it's important to put in place short circuits, local circuits, nevertheless, with certain exacting standards with regard to traceability, with and care of the product as well. And I'd like to add, and this will actually really bring designing back into the headlines. Also with short circuits, I think this will be very beneficial for design as a whole, and it will allow a certain section of the artistic society to come into their own light. They had been neglected in the past, and I think if we go to the end of the argument, and I think this is something that's very important to mention, I think that multi-brands in town centres, these are areas where these young designers can actually be integrated into over and above the creative process, but also into the distribution process. Yes, we actually had a round table with the CEO of Bercy, who was talking about creating really a new life in the center of towns by doing this. So we're all behaving like millennials. You have to, you know, look at me, look at me. I don't even have to be on the social networks to be have a millennial frame of mind. Obviously, you know, social networks are important, social media is important, but young people like to go together and they like to do shopping. And that means that the actual distribution, the retail sector will have to change. And, you know, and we have to recall the pleasure that fashion gives us. And this is shared pleasure. Armo Ardidan 2 years ago said to young designers, it's fantastic to be connected and technology is wonderful, but let's not forget to be creative. And I think this is a very, shows signs of solidarity. Yes, you were talking about sharing and that we can progress by sharing. So who's next? You have a look at this stand. You will see Tic Terra. The only one that's missing is the Atelier Néerlandais. I think what's happening today is, well, in the past, everything had to be pretty and lovely looking. But now I think people want to progress together. And as Frederick said, with regard to creativity, this gives the possibility to have more creative brands because they won't be actually crushed down by the major players.
We are doing at the Atelier Néerlandais.
Yes,
we have young designers who are member.
Vous connaissez l'atelier?
Yeah, some of them do demi-couture, and they just use the fabrics of the couture and recycle them in a way. Others, they just skip the whole chain and they just sell directly Instagram and Facebook. So it's whole new channels, only made to measure. They only have a sample collection and sell directly. And I think that's a movement really growing because on the one hand, you see in the center of towns, it's only mono brands. And you pay in department store really high fees. So that's for young designers kind of impossible to go to this kind of collaborative spaces with multi-brand. That could be a solution, but how to scale up? You know, that's for everyone. How to have finance, how to have visibility, and what you see with many younger designers. In their DNA, there is already kind of, well, we are trying to have less damaging fabric. We try to keep logistics short.
Yes.
But still, if they have to ship their one piece to Japan, that's also still not very sustainable in that sense. So it's still, you know, there are those experiments we need. And what we do, at least at this Atelier Néerlandais, just in the center of town of Paris, 4 times a year during Fashion Week, they can meet the whole world there without paying very high fees, being in very big places, but to try out, to experiment, and try to make their brand work. You know, but always looking. It's really in many young brands, as you say, it's really about trying to find an answer to all those things. But but on the other hand, they still have the urge that they want to create. You know, they want to make things. So that's never going to change. That's never going to disappear.
Yes, I think you're right. And you're right to actually say that this is a question of urgency. I'm really pleased about how enthusiastic you all were. Is there anybody who would like to ask a question to these guests? Have they said everything? Has any? Antoine? Yeah. Well, I have a comment to make. There is a question. David, can you hand around the mic? Can you say who you are? I am the production manager for a Canadian brand. I'd like to know what does the consumer really want? Is it up to us to find, is it up to the creator to find solutions, or is it the consumer that's leading the game? Well, this is a very interesting question. I think today it is the brand that has to find the solution to be as clean, as quick as possible. But they mustn't forget to be creative. That's the first initiative, in my opinion. But I think the brands, if they haven't done this already, they have to start. And you, the designer, what would you like to say? That's not a good question for me. It's not against you. I think this isn't the question that should be raised. I think we have to go forward. We have to find outlets to allow us to go forward. We have to find opportunities. But we have to remain true to ourselves. And this is why I don't like your question, because I don't really even understand it. It's not against you personally, but it's really with regard to what my process is. Frederic, have you got something to say? It's a good example from Canada with the accent to boot. I think I agree with what Valerie said. Today, the question is no longer relevant. We have to go forward, that's all. We have carried out experiments where we sold products saying that they were very creative or highlighting eco-friendliness. And so, but now today it's the garment itself which actually does its own publicity. Well, how the producers actually prove this is one thing, but now it is absolute evidence. We have it. But the question is, should still be asking this question. There are companies who are still thinking about this question, but they're still asking questions of this nature. Well, you might say that they're asking this question because it's not really obvious. Well, I think the issue is that nobody's the same on Earth. And you can't have 6 billion responses to have an individual response. Today, the problem with the brands is that the brand values are important, but these nevertheless have to respond to the individual's issues. So what are the consumers' expectations and what are the pledges of the manufacturers? Well, there's a slight dichotomy between the consumer and a brand that's established and that has established values. So I think this was a question that will be resolved relatively quickly. The concept of values, which is variable, this is what makes all the difference, you know. And this actually not only attracts the consumer, but it makes them faithful, makes them loyal. And when people are loyal, the system works. The fashion system works in this manner. It's true. This form of loyalty is subject to certain requirements, certain demands. You know, today this salon, this trade fair is Fairyland for fashion, you know. Obviously, we are creating dreams, but we also need to move together, move forward together. Any other questions? Well, if there aren't any other questions, I should like to thank you all for taking part in this roundtable. Thank you, Caroline, Frédéric, Valérie, Isabelle, and everybody around us, Mohamed and Frédéric. Enjoy the trade fair, and thank you once more.